All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny. This is Matt, the expert in all things origins, creation, and evolution. Matt, it's great to have you here, brother. What we are doing tonight is we are going to be dismantling evolution and confirming creation, but this is going to be a teaser or a sneak preview into the work that we've been doing on this topic. We've been spending a lot of time brainstorming ideas, putting together slides, doing a lot of research for some upcoming programs. One specific one at the end of this year. Chris, good to see you, brother. We've got Eon Monk. Good to see you as well. I know this was kind of impromptu and last minute, so we do appreciate some people recognizing the fact that we are live. Doki Doki, bat signal is out for Matt. Remember when we did that, brother, going back a couple years ago?
Oh yeah, the bat phone called.
Wasn't that? That was great. Hey, we got to bring back the Matt Man phone one of these days.
Yeah, good idea.
So yeah, so as I was saying, Alfonso Carlos says Donny for Prez. Yeah, I mean, if you guys will vote me in, I am Canadian, so I don't know if that'll work out too well, but it'll be worth a shot. And so yeah, right here, Matt and I, we've got an end of the year event, 2024, all things creation. Me, Matt, and Matt Powell. So we're going to be here. This is going to be great. We're going to be discussing all things creation, origins, ancestry. We're going to be going over It's going to be a fun interactive show with the audience. And we're going to be going over a lot of the slides and points that we've been putting together, which we're going to give you a sneak preview of tonight. And we're going to be giving several presentations, Matt, on this channel and on other channels in 2025. And so that's why we wanted to give everybody an hour or so here of material, because it doesn't take much to dismantle evolution and confirm creation. So we can definitely do that in teaser form within an hour. So I was supposed to be here with Dr. Jerry Bergman, and this show is going to be heavy in content. I've spent hours putting together material for this program with Jerry Bergman. Very important program. And it is largely going to focus here on his book, an excellent book, 3 Pillars of Evolution Demolished. So he goes over a lot of the pertinent points related to creation evolution. And we have a lot of material to cover, Jerry and I. There's a lot of sickness going around. I'm still getting over a cold. Matt, your household is sick. I completely lost my voice on Monday. And so what I have now is largely congested, but so much better than what I had over the weekend and on Monday. But it's still a blessing that we were able to get our Fuzz Rana Robertson Genesis debate in. Anyways, Dr. Bergman is also under the weather a little bit. He thought that he might start to feel better by 6:30, but as we know, I always feel that optimistic too, Matt, where you're like, well, I'm sick, but maybe I'll kick it within 8 hours. But what happens, brother? It always gets worse, no matter how much vitamin C you take. So Jerry and I said, you know what, we'll reschedule. We've got a lot to cover in that show. And so we're going to let him get better, give me time to fully get better. And so that should be in about a week. We'll probably reschedule. We do want to do that program before Jerry's debate here, his big debate with, let's get the picture up here for everybody, Dr. Bergman and Dr. Stern Cardinal. So that's going to be first thing in January. So anyways, again, what we are here for, Matt and I, we're going to be giving you a teaser into some of the work we've been doing, dismantling evolution and confirming creation. Matt, what's going on, brother?
I'm just ready to improv and go from here. I never know where it's going to go. Whatever the audience wants, they can throw whatever questions they want, and we're going to go for it.
Yeah. We're doing this live too, because we want to give you guys the opportunity to send in some questions, and Jamie Russell says tease us already. Well, that's it. That was the teaser. We're wrapping things up, guys. Thanks for tuning. Okay, let's screen share. I'm gonna go over a couple things. Matt and I are gonna bounce some ideas off of each other. And yeah, Matt and I are excited for 2025. We have a lot of slides. We got some several presentations. You know, I've got a general presentation on ancestry, but then I've also got, which I've given, but I've added to it. I've got separate presentations on ERVs, chromosome 2 fusion, and other topics where it's just, rather than an overview, we're focusing in on a specific issue and then dismantling it. So Matt and I look forward to giving many of those presentations in 2025. For those interested in getting a presentation from us, reach out. Standing for Truth Ministries at gmail.com. Just get a quick sip of water here. So, believe God more and believe man less. Very important quote we could all live by. The Bible says we shouldn't put our faith in the wisdom of man, but in the power of God. Man will tell you that time, matter, and space came from nothing. Man will tell you that non-living chemicals sorted themselves out to evolve into the first self-replicating molecule. Man will tell you that you're related to a banana plant. Don't put your faith in the wisdom of man, guys. Good science always affirms good scripture. Again, good science always affirms scripture, and all scripture is good. So, Matt, that's why I wanted to ask you this. Again, good science always affirms scripture. What do we mean by that? Well, firstly, we shouldn't be surprised, Matt, that we deal with so many scoffers and mockers, those that are willingly ignorant. As Ken says in the Greek, that means dumb on purpose. And so 2 Peter 3 predicts exactly what we experience and what we do every single day, brother. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, and we've been in the last days, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, I mean, you see that all the time, right? With the way the world is, where the world is obviously heading, you'll see a lot of atheists or skeptics. They'll ask that exact question. What you keep saying Jesus is going to come back. You keep saying that the Bible's real, the Bible's true. Well, where is he? Right? In a scoffing fashion. For since the fathers fell asleep, notice this, uniformitarianism. All things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this, they willingly are ignorant. They say ignorance is bliss. And so many people who, as 2 Peter 3 says, walking after their own lusts, rather than believing God's word and having to give an account for their lives, their rejection of God, they'd rather remain ignorant and believe that there's no creator to this obvious creation, okay, and all the incredible design and complexity associated with it. So they're going to deny three things. And these three things, Matt, are the three things that we spend most of our day arguing with people over. That by the word of God, the heavens were of old, so the creation, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water, here's your global flood, the Genesis flood, perished. That's point two that they deny. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto what? Fire against the day of judgment. So the third thing they reject, that they're willingly ignorant of, is the coming judgment. This time it's going to be by fire. In the past, it was by water. The day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Here's the thing. Your creation event, the first thing that they reject, right, Matt? Heavens were of old. That was universal. God created everything. Time, matter, space, heaven, the earth. The third thing they reject, which is the coming judgment by fire, Most people will agree that's not just a localized judgment coming to a city near you, one city in America. No, that is a judgment by fire on the whole planet, universal in scope, worldwide in scope. So you know what that means? To be hermeneutically consistent, hermeneutics just means Bible interpretation. The second event that people deny has to be worldwide, universal, because some want to say, well, this was local. Well, wait a minute. The creation wasn't just local. The coming judgment by fire isn't just local. They're both worldwide, universe wide. And so is the second thing that people deny. And this is a prediction. This is prophecy by Peter. And how many people, Matt, do we deal with that say there's no evidence for a flood? There was never a flood. Yeah, we know Peter predicted that you scoffers would come about and deny the reality that what? We see sedimentary layers that extend over entire continents or even further. Okay, we see marine fossils in landlocked areas that are far from the sea. We see billions and billions of fossils that require rapid burial. And yet they'll say there's no evidence for the flood. It's like it's all around you. Just step outside. But these people are ignorant. They're willingly ignorant. But this tells us it's not just a local flood. It's a worldwide flood because the creation was universe wide. The coming judgment by fire will be universe wide. Oh, but the middle one here in verse 6, that's local. No, that's you committing eisegesis because you're trying to fit what you think is science, even though it's pseudoscience, into the Bible where it doesn't belong. Okay. So, Matt, here's going to be my question to you, brother. Matthew 19:4. This is Jesus, God manifest in the flesh, the Bible says. John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, God the Father, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity within the one God, becoming flesh. So I think we should believe what he says. What he says is true. He knows better than us. He was there. All things were created by him. Nothing that was not created by Jesus. Created at all. Okay, he's not created. So notice this, verse 4. This is Jesus, and he answered and said unto them, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning, clearly referring to the creation week, made them male and female? So Jesus is saying Adam and Eve were created at the beginning, which is creation week. I've heard some people, some compromisers say, well, it can't be the beginning because man was created on day 6. The beginning would be day 1. No, the context, Jesus is clearly referring to the beginning is in the creation week. And day 6 is still the beginning, Matt. If I told you, well, the first thing I do when I get up is check my YouTube notifications. Okay, well, you know what? That might not be the exact first thing I do. I get up, brush my teeth, okay, go to the bathroom, come downstairs, have breakfast, and then check my YouTube notifications. Just using an example. But all of those things are still at the beginning of my day. It's still the beginning, okay? And so day 6, the creation of man, is still the beginning, even if it wasn't day 1. And he answered and said unto them, this is Matthew 19:4, that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female. In this important passage, Jesus is clearly saying that the creation of Adam and Eve was at the beginning, the creation week. Then they'll say, well, Jesus' point here was about divorce, right? He's making a point of divorce with the Pharisees when he was debating them. Yeah, he was making an important point about marriage, how sacred it is, and how wrong divorce is by looking to the creation of Adam and Eve. It doesn't negate the fact that he's making a point based on a reality, based on a truth, the truth being what? The creation of Adam and Eve being at the beginning, okay? And not billions of years ago, as in the beginning that they would say of time, matter, space. They would argue humans, Homo sapiens, would be about 100 to 200,000 years ago. Mark 10:6. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. There's Adam and Eve. And so it was written. So, guys, Genesis claims to be the history book of the universe. We see no hint at evolution. We see no hint at common descent. Do we see here humans and chimpanzees are related? Is God saying, well, humans and chimpanzees and pine trees all go back to a common ancestor? No. It says, and so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was what? The mother of all living. So we have two people. This is special creation, independent origins, Adam and Eve, the first two people. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and notice this, all that in them is. That includes man. That includes the earth. That includes the sea. And rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Notice this. Genesis 2:7. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. Man did not evolve through evolutionary processes from pre-humans, hominin-like creatures. No. And the rib which the Lord God hath taken from man made he a woman and brought her unto the man. Not even a hint at evolution. And all things created in 6 literal days. Everything. So, Matt, my question is this, brother. Many people want to go against clearly what the Bible's saying. We read the Bible literarily, not with wooden literalism, literarily, meaning we recognize imagery, we recognize symbology, we recognize moments of exaggeration, and you can find that within a historical narrative, moments of that, but you recognize that, okay? And usually it's pretty obvious. So we don't believe in wooden literalism, but interpreting scripture literarily, you see that God is clear that the first two human beings were Adam and Eve. They did not come about through evolutionary processes, and they were created just 6,000 years ago. Okay, not 100 to 200,000 years ago. So my question is this. There are many people that want to look at this and twist it, say it means something else. Well, it's just symbolic, or Adam is just an archetype, the first archetype. He's just a priest, the first one to make a covenant with God, or, these aren't even real people, or this is mytho-history, whatever. There's many different ways that people twist this, many different views, theistic evolution, progressive creation, day-age theory, gap theory, so on and so forth. Do we have to twist these texts, or can we believe what they say, especially because the scientific data has actually confirmed exactly what the Bible tells us about origin? So why would we throw out a perfectly good book for some science that's already been debunked? Some people want to debate the question, is evolution compatible with the Bible? I'd rather debate the question, is evolution compatible with science? Because it's not. So why are we going to take something that's not even science, something that's been demolished, and put it in the Bible where it doesn't belong? And so, Matt, the Bible tells us that God created two people, Adam and Eve, unique, special, and independent from any other form of life. That includes chimpanzees, whales, banana plants. Okay. Has the scientific data confirmed this, brother?
In a lot of different ways. And there's so many different views people can take on what you're saying. And like you said, I think that a lot of people, they go to these philosophical arguments because if you just go to the science and you look at it, you don't need to invent stories. You don't need to interpret and add more time. It just makes things more confusing and confuses other people. So if you don't like science, that's where gap theory comes in, right? That's where you could say, well, I guess day one was 1 billion years. Okay, I know you're never going to argue the science because you don't need a gap theory. You don't need evolutionary, theistic evolution. Those are what we would call a rescue device. We can just go to the raw data and point to Adam and Eve and the genetics of all people today in multiple ways. And that's what's kind of fun. Matter of fact, we might even do that tonight. Why not, right?
Let's do it. Did you want to pull up some visuals and go over some of that evidence? The fact that we've literally discovered Adam and Eve,
Sure.
our first parents, the first couple in our genetics. We've discovered one mitochondrial DNA lineage, one Y chromosomal lineage. And Matt, let's give you the floor, brother. Let's confirm creation and dismantle evolution. Go ahead.
Okay, here we go, everyone. There's literally only two real stories: man evolving in Africa and migrating out after they evolved there, or there was a global flood and mankind branched out from the Tower of Babel story. Now, what Donny was talking about goes even further back before the flood. And that's going to take some look at through genetics. Now, the best way to do that is by looking inside the human genome, inside the mitochondria, and looking at mutations that build up. Evolution does that as well. But they actually use a really bad, what he mentioned earlier, pseudoscience. What they do is they don't look at the observed data. They calibrate theirs, and they calibrate it to the fossil record. So what they've done is they've now taken a phylogenetic mutation rate, and they've ignored the pedigree mutation rate, which is a germline mutation rate. So what they do is, by looking now at the fossil record, they need a very slow mutation rate to talk about how there's all the mutations that have accumulated over time. So when you see a study and they go, oh, look, there's evidence for the origin of modern man. About 154,000, 160,000 years ago, they found some bones. And they say, look, supports genetic studies. Whoa, slow down now. What are they talking about? Because if we actually go back early on into those genetic studies, here's one that goes back to 1992 from Ludstorm, one of the very first pedigree mutation rate studies ever done. And we find that in the D loop, which is the control region of mitochondria, they discovered that there was one substitution every 25 generations. Wow, that's extremely fast. Remember, all humans on Earth are divided about 8 substitutions on average, with a maximum of only 24. So this is showing you that there's one substitution arises every 25 generations. How fast it reaches fixation is based on population size, but that's quick. And then in 1997, Parsons did the largest genetic study ever done from the blood bank of the FBI. And when he compiled all of that blood and looked at germline mutation rates over many generations, he discovered that the Eve, the mother of all living people, based on the substitution rate and mutation rate, lived only 6,500 years ago. Now, of course, they couldn't really fathom this because there's no global bottleneck 6,500 years ago in the evolutionary theory. 6,500 years ago, humans are already living worldwide around the globe. So how in the world could all women alive today descend from a single female on the biblical timeline? It doesn't make any sense. They know it didn't make any sense either, but they couldn't get around that. So here's that. They studied the hypervariable region 1 and 2. So they studied everything they needed to. And then in 1997, the same year, another scientist decided, I'm going to study and look inside the mitochondria itself. And look at what he found. One mutation every 59 generations. Extremely fast. These rates are beyond anything expected in the evolutionary timeline. Then we look at the next year, because they wanted to cross-confirm their evidence, and Holland joined him. And in 1998, they ran the mutation rate again, and it was just as fast as before. Again, the substitution rate was 1 every 30 generations this time. Way too fast, landing right on mitochondrial Eve around 6,000 years ago. And a lot of people go, oh, you guys are only using Parsons' study because his is the fastest mutation rate. Not at all, actually. He got much faster. Look at this. The AFDIL family, which was the blood bank that he got from the forensic pathology from the FBI, that was extremely fast. And this is most of the lineages. You can see there's 73 lineages from there and over 121 generations. So this was the vast majority. And look how fast the substitution rate actually was. 1 every 17 generations. So it's even faster. So he took the average right here in the middle, 1 out of 32. So no, he didn't pick the fastest mutation rate. If he did, it would be even faster. Mitochondrial Eve would have landed probably 3,000 years ago using this rate, but he's not. He averaged it out. So the people that are saying, "Oh, you're cherry picking the data," no, we're not. Neither was he. Then in the following year, we have, or I'm sorry, 2003, Howell did another substitution rate study. He got the exact same results again, extremely fast. And then in 2000 and 1996, 1997, he found that the his study matched both Howell's and Parsons. Again, going back, he said, look, both of our studies came to a remarkably similar conclusion. So all of these pedigree, all these observable mutation rates are landing on the biblical timeline. But it gets worse. They ran a simulation, a mathematical simulation, D. Rhodes, and he programmed it in the computer. And he said, okay, let's see what the computer generates based on all of the different studies. And he got a most recent common ancestor just a few thousand years ago, like in all the other pedigree models. Nothing even remotely close to the evolutionary timeline. Remember, they have a bottleneck occurring 200 to 300,000 years ago. Where is it? We don't see that anywhere in the genetics. We only land on these biblical timelines. This woman only compared one of the control region compartments, but you'll notice that comparing the hypervariable region 1 in Europeans, the common ancestor for all of them lived 220 generations ago. So if the 30-year generation time, that's 6,600 years ago. That's a high in generation time, but nonetheless, these numbers aren't good for evolution. They're landing on the biblical timeline every time. Then in 2005, another one substitution every 29 generations, biblical timeline. Again, 2012, biblical timelines, identical to Parsons' mutation rate. What a surprise. Then they found in the cave a haplogroup that belonged to I believe, Norwegian, German. Yeah, Bronze Age German. Lived 4,000 years ago based on the mutation rate. And then we have young Earth creationist Nathaniel Jeanson, who ran Ding et al. 2015 study. And he ran the mutation rate, found that there's one mutation every 6 generations. That's only 360 generations ago. So based on the generation time, it lands between 5,760 to 7,560 years ago. These mutation rates are very, very good, and they're used. These aren't just some like made up things that don't get utilized. Right, Donnie? These are used by the FBI to convict and find killers. They're used by the National Institute of Health to track and find diseases in people. So clearly they're good. And they're 25 times higher, or 20 times higher than the expected evolutionary time frame of mutations passing on from generation to generation. And you guys might be thinking, okay, so what? This is just humans that you're talking about. Well, yeah, we're talking about Adam and Eve. When did they leave? These were real people. This is, if the Bible is the history book of the world, we would want to be able to find them in our genetics. That's exactly what we did. So we can track them backwards in time and find when they lived. And it was very recently. That's why we can trust that the Bible is talking about a literal history very recently, not far in the past. So when we go to the other studies and we look at penguins, well, guess what? They did a pedigree mutation rate on penguins. And we get the exact same results. The most recent common ancestor of all penguins lived 4,536 years ago. Biblical timeline of global flood. Then we go to bears. Bears have a fast mutation rate as well. When did polar bears arise and diverge from brown bears? Well, based on their mutation rates and how many differences there are between them, there's 295, by the way, you get about 1,547 years ago, the polar bear arose. Pretty cool. We can actually do that inside of the genetics. Here's the wolf and domestic dog. They split about 4,441 years ago. Again, biblical timeline. How about a coyote and a dog? 4,735 years ago. The numbers are just so good for the biblical creationists. It's amazing. How about whales? Well, whales.
So are you saying, Matt, that the mutation rates with a lot of these animal species are also in line with biblical expectations?
Absolutely. And
Wow.
that's what we would expect to find, a fast mutation rate, contrary to the evolutionary phylogenetic mutation rate based on the fossil record. So when we look at just the data from human beings or animals, and we look at every generation, how many mutations do they get? What do we find? Well, we find just a few generations and they have a new mutation. Then we look in the species that we know they're related to and say, well, what's the maximum amount of genetic mutation differences between them? So if there's 100, you go, okay, well, how long does it take for 100 mutations to build up in a difference between them? We go, well, if it's 5 generations every 100, it takes about 5,000 years. Real simple to do. And that's what these studies have done. The mutation rates finally were done on whales, because we know that whales went through a global bottleneck about 200 years ago from whaling, where they were killed down to just a few thousand in total. That's among every species that was alive. And guess what? When they ran that mutation rate, they discovered something. They noticed that, wow, the phylogenetic evolutionary mutation rate, which you see here on the left, wasn't true at all. Matter of fact, it's so fast that it's down here, it changed everything. They noticed that their results show that there was an 86% lower than their earlier reported estimates based on the phylogenetic mutation rate for how many were even alive at the time. So it solved the problem that evolution actually had with how many living creatures there were at the time. So we can see now that they completely falsified deep time evolution for us on another pedigree mutation rate study, and they solved the whale problem, that how many they actually were before the whaling actually began. And then you've heard this before. Oh, but you guys are ignoring deep-rooted pedigrees. You see, once you go back more than just a few generations, those mutations just get erased by natural selection. So you guys are counting it fast, but in reality, the farther you go back in time, the slower it gets. And since you guys are only looking at humans, then you're really not taking into account how deep time. Well, guess what? We actually do have now a study on chickens where we know how many generations there were. There's over 50, and we know the mutation rate. We know the lineages. There was over 385 transmissions of mutations that were documented in over 50 generations, and there was 2 lineages. We did the math. You can see it right here. You can take them back. That's 0.04 mutations in a generation. So that's 1 mutation every 25 generations of a chicken. A chicken's generation is only about 5 to 7 months. That means that the most recent common ancestor falls between 4,375 and 6,125 years ago, with an average being 5,250 years ago. Boom. Biblical young earth creation timeline. Why doesn't it converge with a common ancestor of the chicken? Aren't we being told that the chicken is related to a dinosaur? Aren't we being told that it descended from the T-Rex lineage? Why aren't they converging on a common ancestor, going back to that very lineage? It's just because it's not true. Those are stories. And the evidence from looking, even in these deep-rooted pedigrees, which I just showed you, shows us that the estimated rates versus the observed rates are completely contradictory. There's nothing in between. What we see is fast. What they said we should find are completely slow. So these are the evolutionary assumptions. This is what we see. It's pretty obvious that the evolutionary assumptions are completely falsified by the data that we literally see. And some of them admit this, by the way. Look, there's a general perception that that there's a competition to get the oldest dates, and there's kudos in it. You know, you make the newspaper, you might get famous for putting down that there's a new date. But look, they'll admit, look, did a discrete event 200,000 years ago produce modern humans? There is no strong evidence to support a significant population bottleneck occurring specifically around 200,000 years ago. Isn't that ironic that they literally admit that there's actually no good evidence for that at all? Then they went looking in the fossil record, they couldn't find anything there either. So they're telling you stories as though it's a fact, and the observable evidence tells us exactly what's true. The phylogenetic assumption-built method is just a mythical fairy tale to match their mythical fossil record, which they also can't confirm. They can't find their bottleneck in the fossil record, yet they trust the fossil record to tell them accurate dates of times when species evolved. They can't even find the correct cats. Cats just arrive out of nowhere. You know how many ghost lineages there are that just animals arising out of nowhere with no ancestry, no parent common ancestor anywhere to be found. They're all over. So they just make up stories. And they tell us, and as we're kids, we're indoctrinated. We just fall for it, right? Plus, we don't want to fill out the test wrong and fail for no reason. So we just believe whatever they told us. We don't question it. But once you start questioning it and looking at the raw data, it's so obvious. It's so easy to confirm biblical creation. It's ridiculous. All we did is just look at a few pedigree mutation rates, and all of them confirm the biblical timeline. Nothing even remotely gets close to the evolutionary timeline. But yet they just so happen to land perfectly on the biblical young earth creation timeline. Come on, what are the odds of that? If you were a betting person, which would you bet on? So if they're going to do a pedigree mutation rate on pick an animal that's never been done before, I don't know, anything, it doesn't matter. I guarantee you the next pedigree mutation rate that comes out with a creature that's never been done before is going to match the biblical timeline. That's why? Because it's true. If it wasn't true, at least something would come out to be different, wouldn't it? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but they just don't. They always land on the biblical timeline. It's just that's how easy it is to make predictions in our model. It's so cool.
You killed it. I mean, spot on. And yet still just a sneak preview or teaser into the amazing evidence for separate ancestry map. There's a couple questions based on that. Well, let's start with Sydney Raptor. So I've got several papers. There's one, I think, as recent as 2023. I got to find it, where it talks about how the observed mutation rate is at least 10 to 20 times faster. But anyway, Sydney's Raptor is wondering what the source is for the 29 times higher than expected by evolution theory.
You can go on Wikipedia and type in germline human mutation rate, and it'll tell you it's 10 to 20 times faster on Wikipedia. You can Google it. AI will probably tell you as well. All of the studies show that there's a discrepancy that's much, much higher. They're all faster, every single one of them. It doesn't matter where you look. It doesn't matter what animal you look at. It doesn't matter if it's aquatic or land life. It doesn't matter if it's reptilian. It doesn't matter. They're all faster.
Yeah, I'm trying to find one specific paper that I like to cite that I think it's from 2022 or 2023, but with all the slides I have, I'll have to find it later. But yeah, I mean, it's all over the scientific literature. And by pedigree, if you were to take, let's say, grandmother, mother, daughter, let's say in the mitochondrial DNA map, and you were to count up the differences, well, you'd see that you've got a fast mutation rate with the amount of differences. But then when you convert that or compare that with the phylogenetic rate, you realize that the phylogenetic rate is a lot slower. Yes,
exactly. The phylogenetic mutation rate is always going to be based on a fossil record. So it's always going to be a completely exaggerated, slow number. They have to slow it down. And sometimes you'll find a pedigree mutation rate study where they don't find any mutations because they might be an island landlocked group of people that are related to one another. So they might have not, they might have had a disease where selection removed a mutation. Or they only looked at a particular region of the mitochondria, like hypervariable region 2, or they weren't even trying to get a mutation rate. So sure, there's going to be some discrepancy somewhere, but one or two studies that are outside the realm doesn't really matter. We can explain those. That's why we make predictions and evolution does not. Nathaniel Jensen has challenged anybody that believes in evolution, make a prediction based on the evolutionary phylogenetic mutation rate on any animal. You choose it, and he will run the numbers because they have a laboratory. So they'll find the animal, they'll run the pedigree mutation rate on it. And he said, we'll do a head-to-head published comparison between the two studies. Nobody has taken him up on it. Remember when he challenged Vienna from Biologos? Yeah, no one has taken him up on that. Oh yeah, I'm working on a study actually right now from that. I will drop it inside of the, here we go. I'm going to send everybody.
And that just, again, goes to show you that it's creationists that are meeting the gold standard of science. The gold standard of science is making testable and falsifiable predictions, and creationists are doing it in every field: genetics, biology, astronomy, doing it in geology. I mean, look at the James Webb Space Telescope data. Dr. Jason Lisle, PhD astrophysicist, we had him on, we discussed it recently, and he made predictions about what we should find in the universe, in the distant galaxies. Then the James Webb Space Telescope data came up, and it confirmed those predictions and contradicted Big Bang expectations, where the furthest galaxies are mature and contain elements that shouldn't be there if they were in the early stages of evolution, galaxy evolution. So it really is an amazing time to be a biblical creationist, as you pointed out, Matt, right here, that this methodology was adopted by the FBI, and that the pedigree right in the Parsons paper would put Eve at just 6,000 years. And we have the Eve consensus sequence published in the secular literature, where we see that there's very low diversity in the mitochondrial DNA. Same thing goes for the Y chromosomal DNA. Low diversity in general, which is exactly what we'd expect as biblical creationists. If God created just two people thousands of years ago, that would restrict levels of genetic diversity. And yet that's what we find. If evolution's true, deep time evolution's true, we should have higher levels of genetic diversity. And that's not what we find. And so, as always, evolutionists have to come up with rescue devices. Anyways, you can build a phylogenetic tree like this. Dr. Rob Carter did it. And you can see again that with a fast mutation rate, low diversity, you also have irregular branch sizes. So, for example, take this haplogroup here in Europe, most common, HVR. You'll notice the differing size branches. These all represent DNA differences or mutations. They all go back to a single common ancestor here. So that means some people in the same amount of time are picking up more mutations than their cousins. Okay, that breaks evolutionary molecular clock assumptions, because now the mutation rates are irregular, but they're fast, which is interesting, as you've pointed out. So with a fast mutation rate and low diversity, only a few DNA differences separating any two people, guess what? That's biblical time right there. One woman, fast mutation rate, low diversity. It's exactly what we'd expect. You can't take these DNA differences back 200,000 years, not without a lot of rescue mechanisms. Exactly. Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, his tree here, he points out the three major haplogroups, L, M, and N. All lineages go back to those three haplogroups. Well, what's interesting, and this is a possible theory, you have at creation Adam and Eve, followed up by rapid and exponential population growth, right? So it's a single generation bottleneck. And then, and Adam and Eve wouldn't have had any mutations. They would have design diversity, but no mutations. Then at the flood, you have this near extinction event where you got 8 people: Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives. And then the Bible says from those 3 couples was the earth overspread, repopulated. And yet we have 3 major haplogroups here. That could be Noah's 3 daughters-in-law. Why not? Fits the biblical creation model. And then the same thing with the Y chromosome. Fast mutation rate, low diversity, one man, right? Every single male Y chromosome on the planet, you can take them, line them up, form a tree, goes back to a single man, which is fascinating. So here's a good question, Matt, for you, brother. May's page. Do we actually go all the way back to Eve with mitochondrial DNA, or just to the nearest ancestral mother of Noah's son's wives? So let me say this, Matt, because it's a good question and it's a curious question. We have Y chromosome Noah. We know who our last Y chromosomal ancestor was. That was at the flood 4,500 years ago. And that's actually what we have. We have 4,500 years worth of mutations. When it comes to mitochondrial Eve or mitochondrial DNA, we have Noah's 3 daughters-in-law, right?
Yes.
So is mitochondrial Eve going back to, again, the ark? Now, here's the thing, though. Noah's Y chromosome probably wasn't that different than Adam's. And Noah's wife, or specifically the 3 daughters-in-law, their mitochondrial DNA probably wasn't that different than Eve's either, because there would have been less mutation accumulation before the flood. It was only 2,000 years until the flood, right? Then mutations accumulate more, deleterious mutations after the flood. So, yeah, our most recent common ancestors are at the flood, but I believe that Y chromosome and that mitochondrial DNA was still pretty close to probably what Adam and Eve's look like. Matt, what are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah, the reason I think that we can go back to creation with the mitochondria is because of Nathaniel Jensen's noting that the 3 different women had different mutations and that were nicknamed in the haplogroups of L, M, and N. So because 3 different women with 3 different mitochondria were on the ark, we can go past that bottleneck to Eve. But if they were all sisters and all related, no, we could only go back to the flood. Just like we can only go back to the flood with Noah and his Y chromosome, because it was the only lineage of males on the ark. So with the Y chromosome, we can only go to the ark, but with the mitochondria, we can go past that because the women were not related to one another and go all the way back to Eve. But if they were related and they had the exact same, genetics with no different mutations, they wouldn't be known as L, M, and M haplogroups. They'd all be the same, and we would never be able to get back to Eve. They would probably bottleneck the same way. And to answer your question earlier, this is from the Parsons paper. Can you remove that standing for truth question? Because we'll notice down here on the bottom, that first one that they wanted answers for, you can see right here, it's 20-fold higher. This is the Parsons 1997 study. You can find it on ResearchGate for free. It just takes a minute to load, but that's the best place to find it. You can read right here that with a short 20-year generation time, evolution expected it to be around 133,000 years ago, but it's 20-fold higher. And the most recent common ancestor was 6,500 years ago down here. And you can even see them, I think, say, like, we don't believe that that's true, but that's what the data says. But nonetheless, that's the answer to your question about where you could find that number of 20-fold higher. It's directly from the studies. So
right. Yeah, very good. And it's funny because they'll say, oh, well, you got to look to the phylogenetic rate, the substitution rate, the rate that the whole population changes. But if the evolutionists understood basic population genetics, we've done entire programs on this. I wrote an extremely technical article, peer-reviewed by Dr. John Sanford, wrote it with Chris Roop. It's published on the website. Okay. That the per generation neutral mutation rate equals the long-term substitution rate. So it doesn't change because you, in deep time, you would have that point. Okay. Fixation equilibrium. So if every generation your neutral mutation rate is 1, or you're going to have 1 new mutation becoming fixed, stuck in the population every generation, if evolution is true. But we know, according to the creation model as well, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, we'd have rapid fixation of new mutations after the flood for that first 500 to 1,000 years, because you have a small population. They're isolated for at least 300 to 500 years before they spread out at Babel, right? So that would be a fast mutation rate on a small isolated population, faster rate, rapid fixation, right?
Exactly. More recombination going on, a more pure genome, which is larger for more spaces for mutations. Smaller populations also have faster genetic drift, so that you see mutations just going even quicker. I mean, it's so easy to answer in our model. They have to now account for why is it so fast. Now they have to use rescue devices. How ironic is that? They're always telling us, you guys are just retrofitting the data to fit your model. You guys are. It's the exact opposite of what you're saying is true. So they just make assertions when they don't actually know the data. Or if they do know the data, then they're lying. So,
well, and then their weak rebuttal is, well, the neutral mutation rate equaling fixation rate, that's just absolutely neutral mutations. because once they become effectively neutral or nearly neutral, eventually they'll build up to where they're deleterious enough selection will remove them from the equation. No, they're underestimating just how functional the genome is, but also how little absolutely neutral mutations there are. Okay. The vast majority of mutations are neutral, but more accurately, Matt, they're nearly neutral. They're slightly deleterious. And so they're still neutral to selection, even though they're slightly deleterious. Selection can't see them. So yes, that rate equals the long-term substitution rate in a deep time evolutionary scenario. I want to share a screen here to let people know where to go to find this irrefutable article here on this topic. Does genetic drift solve the mutation load paradox? So this is an article I wrote, I think about a year ago now. And so it's comprehensive, but if you scroll down to Fatuma's quote, but also many other citations, you'll see that. So notice this from Douglas Fatuma. Since on average, it'll take 4 NE generations for mutations to reach fixation, about the same number of neutral mutations should be fixed every generation. The rate of fixation mutations is theoretically constant and equals the neutral mutation rate. You can go through all this. We refute the critics and show why their rescue devices don't work. But I also wanted to highlight Sydney Raptor's rescue device here. Sydney says mitochondrial Eve refers to mitochondrial most recent common ancestor. So here's the thing. They assume that mitochondrial Eve existed 100 to 200,000 years ago, right, Matt, in Africa. Okay, well, I mean, you've already decimated that. But what I want to show Sydney Raptor here is this paper in the national, in the NIH, okay? And the paper is written by Dr. Rob Carter. So he's a young earth creationist, not an evolutionist. This isn't a young earth creationist journal. But if you see here and look at the Eve consensus sequence, okay, it comprises very few DNA differences. On average, it's about 20 to 30 mutations. Okay, people differ. And then your most is about 100 to 140. We refuted the evolutionary points on that issue in our last program together, Matt. And so the point is, with a fast mutation rate, low diversity, this Eve is biblical Eve. They want to say, oh, mitochondrial Eve is the Eve in Africa who belong to a greater population. No, that's their assumptions. That's their assertion. That's evolutionary philosophy. It's not consistent with the data. The data tells us that we have one woman. She existed not too long ago. It matches up to biblical Eve. Okay. Very low diversity. Very few DNA differences. Even the max is still very few. And so, no, this here. Now, the evolutionists, they're going to assume this is a coalesce sequence. No, we would argue this is literally Eve's sequence. That's what the data suggests. But they go into this, reading this with their evolutionary based assumptions. So this idea that Eve existed in Africa 200,000 years ago, it's not the biblical Eve. It's been refuted, Matt. Do you have any thoughts on that, brother?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that, okay, take that idea in your mind then and say, okay, it's just the most recent common ancestor. Okay, well, what in the world happened to the rest of the women 6,500 years ago? Go ahead. Explain how they stopped having daughters, or explain how they never had any more kids, or explain how they all died and just re-arose, or how whatever mythical story you want. You can, but you have to now accept in your mind that 6,500 years ago, only one woman managed to have every single female that's on Earth today. There's nothing in the evolutionary model that can explain that at all. So of course we know it says it's the most recent common ancestor, but it is the only recent common ancestor if you break it down logically. Why does it land on the biblical timeline? If you have a better explanation for what happened to the other millions of human beings on the earth according to evolution theory at the same time, feel free, and I'm sure there is a huge scientific paper waiting for that one. They would love to know. Matter of fact, listen to what they say right here. This is you can find it on DNA Interactive. This is right here. Perfect. Look, to mtDNA was an ancestral, and that lived in all living people lived 100 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. Nobody thinks that's the case. But at what point should the model switch from mtDNA time zone to another? I'm worried. What do they have to be worried about? It sounds pretty obvious that they're worried because it lands exactly when we said it would land.
The implications. That's why they're worried.
Yeah. Matter of fact, did you know somebody tried to argue against Parsons? And he teamed up with another guy, and Howell, and they replied. And they debunked every argument that came across, like, oh, maybe it was heteroplasmy that did it, or maybe you tested the wrong parts, or maybe you got the substitution rate wrong. He just destroys them all. And that's what you can type in right there to find the study. It's great. It's good. You can just read through and see that he dotted his I's and crossed his T's. There's nobody that's refuted him yet. Just complainers.
Yeah, remember when we emailed him?
Yeah, that's right.
We challenged them all. If you think you can do better, bring it on, publish it.
Yeah, he still works for the FBI, and they still use his mutation rate to this day. If they're still using it, and he did it in the 90s, think about how good that is. To this day, it's still used.
See, a lot of these atheists, it's not an evidence issue. It's like that meme that we share around where they say there's no evidence for God or no evidence for biblical creation. We say correction. There's no evidence that you'd accept.
Exactly.
Because they know these implications, right, brother? Have any of their rescue devices worked to convince you that, okay, that's a plausible means? Or is this largely a discriminatory piece of evidence, Matt? Mutation rates.
Mutation rates are just one thing. See, everybody, we don't just look at one. One thing is great, but you and me, we look at the entire picture. You see, everybody, they like to hyper focus on one little thing and go, well, what about this one study that was done over here on chipmunks? It's like, who cares? Look at the big picture. What are you talking about? If 50 different things from independent sources all point to one thing, why do you think we should ignore all of that in favor of your one bad argument? It makes no sense. Mutation rates are just one thing in a vast pool of things that we're going to talk about next week, and we're going to absolutely decimate it. I didn't even plan on talking about mutation rates in the next one, so that's good that we covered it this time, because the next time I make my run through my presentation, we're going to only glaze over it because we don't even need it. That's how much evidence there is.
Matt, look at this. Look at this rescue device. Sidney Raptor, the evolutionist. His response is the line, how convenient, all the lineages died out. All we're left is one woman, one man, just a few thousand years ago, fitting biblical expectations. Oh, the lineages died out. All those DNA differences that should be there, they're removed.
Billions of people all died, just left one woman 6,000 years ago.
Notice how Sidney notice how Sidney hasn't actually refuted the mitochondrial diversity within modern human populations paper.
They're gonna have to refute their own scientists now, because pedigree mutation rates were discovered by evolutionary scientists, and they still stand to this day. If you even go on Wikipedia, it literally tells you there's a huge difference between the two, and there's no apparent answer to why. So they have lots of theories, but there's nothing that can explain it away. And then when you add things like you just said, well, what about the most recent common ancestor? We now have to explain that all of the most recent common ancestors for all animals also died at the same time.
Right.
Think about that. Not humans, animals too.
Another important point that Sidney doesn't understand is a lot of this coalescence theory of this rescue device, Matt, it relies on the assumption of random mating. But historically, listen up, Sidney Raptor, you did not have random mating. Okay. Because in the past, largely, what would you have, Matt? You'd have people existing in their own groups, their own tribes, They'd be isolated from each other, right? Somebody who is a group all the way in Australia and a group in Europe and a group in Africa, there's no random mating. People are largely marrying and producing offspring in their own isolated groups or tribes. So guess what? If evolution were true, Sydney Raptor, we shouldn't have just one lineage where all the other ones die out. We should have many mitochondrial Eves.
Tons.
All stemming from these different isolated tribes or groups, not just one. One lineage is what biblical creationists expect, but you guys had to retrofit the data, which is why you came up with rescue device after rescue device, because you have a worldview and basic presuppositions that you have to hold on to no matter what. And that requires what, Matt? Unrealistic rescue devices. Does that make sense, what I said, Matt?
Exactly. It's so simple. I mean, really, that's why, again, they're trying to like get around the data. The scientists themselves said they're worried about it. There would be nothing to worry about if it wasn't true, and it just is. And they can deny it because that's what you said at the beginning. They're just scoffers. They're just trying to get away from the data. Like I said, though, this is just one of many pieces of evidence. They can deny this one. They can deny the next one. They can deny all 50. It doesn't really matter. The story lines up so well with what we would expect.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
And, you know, we put out this challenge, and I put it out in written form the other day right here. So you can go have a look. Homo erectus precludes human evolution. So the fossils, where are all the fossils? Where are all the human fossils, Matt? If deep time evolution is true, and we've been evolving for millions of years from Australopithecine-like ancestors to Homo habilis or habilis, up to erectus, and eventually Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapiens. Where's the billions of dead bodies? They don't exist. And I put out this challenge, hasn't been responded to yet because it can't without rescue devices. Well, fossilization is rare. It's so funny how they look to an argument from the ordering of the fossil record. Why does the fossil record demonstrate large-scale evolution? Then you make these challenges to them, issue these challenges, and what do they say? Well, fossilization's rare, and the fossils that we actually have is not even a good representation of that which has existed on the planet. Yeah, exactly. That's the point. So you're using such limited data to argue that, well, in the lowest layers, you have more simple organisms, and in the higher layers, you have more complex organisms like mammals and humans, right? In this order. No, I want to see where all these dead bodies are, because even the evolutionary community would agree that Homo erectus, for example, lived on the planet for nearly 2 million years, and they are supposedly the most successful hominin species or human species that has ever existed, even more so than us. And they were a sophisticated people. They had campsites. They could make fire. They had an impressive use of tools. They were able to sail. Okay. And so we did some assumptions here that fit the data that works, right? So if we had, let's say, 1 million Homo erectus living across Eurasia, Europe and Asia, okay, we know they're widely distributed and their average generation time is 20 years. Okay, well, they're existing for 2 million years. And even with a lesser population than this, you still expect millions to billions of dead bodies. And guess what, Matt? What you find in terms of Homo erectus fossils could be fit into the trunk of a car. So where's the evidence for their existence? Where's their campsites? Where's the billions of dead bodies? All we find are a handful of fossils. So the evolutionary story is not reflected in the fossil record, Matt, and it's also not reflected in genetics.
Exactly. Genetics is what destroys them, and that's the funniest part about it all, because genetics is where they think evolution stands its best chance. It does not. They failed miserably with their predictions down the line. So,
right. Matt, would you like to answer this one? This is a fair question. Curtis Maximus 51, appreciate it. How do you skirt genetic deformities by having such a limited gene pool? Let's start with Adam and Eve, Matt, and then Noah's family. You know, inbreeding and just a few members of the population? How come they didn't just all die and go extinct due to disease?
Well, imagine if you have a perfect genome and that genome hasn't accumulated very many mutations yet. Now all of a sudden you're able to get away with a lot more damage. And then that before that damage becomes a problem, you now have basically massive amounts of heterozygosity. And then as time goes on, you become more homozygous from intermarriage, but their genome was larger and it was mutation free. It was pristine. I mean, if people could live almost 1,000 years, you could imagine how good the genetics were. Then all of a sudden, as time goes on, especially from Noah, because we know from the Kong 2012 study that the older a male is when he has offspring, the more mutations he passes on. Well, Noah was the oldest person in recorded history to have children at 500 years of age. So he bombarded his children with massive amounts of deleterious mutations. And we can see that when we look at the genetics of multiple different studies, that the most harmful mutations arose about 5,000 years ago. And so those really harmful mutations plummeted the lifespans that we have to now today. I can share that as well, by the way. I'm ready for all of that.
Perfect answer. I want to demolish Sydney Raptor's point here. So it's so funny. This is what they do. So rather than answering a challenge, Matt, well, I can't answer your challenge. But what about you? Where are your, he says, are the 190s of millions of dead bodies? Is that how many human beings existed during the flood? I'll answer this. Or fossils from the flood. Well, we do find billions of fossils from the flood, so that's easy. But when it comes to human beings, okay, well, at the flood, there's probably, I would say, less than 10 million people, way less than that. The Bible describes, Matt, that the earth was filled with violence and wickedness. People were not taking God's command to be fruitful and multiply seriously. So with a world full of violence, crime, wickedness, there'd be a lot of murder. Okay. And so there would definitely be less than 10 million. But even if we went with 10 million, okay, Matt, then let's use that number. Okay. And so you can assume 10 million people, divide that by 700 million cubic kilometers of sediment, these massive stretches of sedimentary layers that stretch across entire continents. But again, you've got these mega sediments as well that you can match. Okay. Mega sequences that you can match worldwide. You know what that means? We only have one human, Matt, for every 70 cubic kilometers of rock. What this is needles in a haystack. And so the chances of finding a pre-flood human in the rocks is very low. God creates two humans at creation, Adam and Eve. They have kids, their kids have kids, but eventually you get to a point where there's so much wickedness and violence and murder and crime and people not following God's commands that you wouldn't expect a large amount of population. Okay. And so, and at the same time, you know that continents were moving fast, right? Catastrophic plate tectonics, Matt. We've got these meters per second movements of the plates. And so if some human beings were in areas where you had, let's say, subduction, well, then they would be taken basically down into the earth, into the mantle where they'd be melted. So I personally wouldn't expect to find a lot of human fossils from the flood, because again, it'd be like finding needles in a haystack. Matt, what are your thoughts, brother?
It also depends where Eden was and where they migrated to the east. Remember, it says that Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden and they went into the east. And then Cain, he rebelled, and after he killed Abel, where'd he go? He went to the east. So now imagine, there's a lot of people that have now tried to guess where Eden was. The Middle East, maybe so, but maybe not, because it doesn't really describe the region very good. So now imagine if the Garden of Eden was like near the Philippines. Well, now all of humanity is in the bottom of the ocean. Good luck ever finding anything there for civilization, right? So again, how much was the population anyway? Well, if we use a 2 to 3% population growth rate from a single pair of people over a 1,500 year period, you're only getting around 15,000 to like 150,000. It's just not much. It's not many people anyway. So,
and what I find funny, Matt, when they try and say, "Oh, well, how come we don't find humans and dinosaurs together, or humans and mosasaurs or whatever," okay, you name it, in the fossil record. Why don't we find pterodactyls in the fossil record with bunny rabbits or something like that? But you know what's funny? We have living fossils, right, Matt? And we did a whole series with Dr. Carl Werner. So one living fossil is the coelacanth, thought to be extinct, now swimming around nicely in the oceans today, right? Nice surprise to everybody. Not necessarily to creationists, though. But according to the evolutionary model, Matt, the coelacanth has a couple 100 million years worth of fossil representation in the geological rock strata. And the coelacanth we find today, this living fossil, it looks just like its fossil representative from the past. But you know what we've never found coelacanth buried with?
Rats.
Whales. But yet we know they live together because they both live in the oceans. They both live today. We have whales and coelacanths in the ocean, but we don't find them buried together in the geological rock strata. But we know they were contemporaries.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So why don't we find, let's say, human and dinosaur fossils together? I know we can discuss some possible isolated cases, but even if we didn't, it doesn't matter. It doesn't prove anything. The fossil record is fickle. We know humans and dinosaurs wouldn't have lived together. I mean, who wants to go live next to a T-Rex? But again, take a coelacanth, take a whale. We can take many other examples. We know they live together because they both live today in the oceans, right, brother? But yet we don't find them in the fossil record together. And the coelacanth just disappears in the fossil record, isn't it right? We have 200 plus million years representation of coelacanths, but then that's it. They're suddenly gone. That's why evolutionists thought they went extinct.
Exactly. They're called Lazarus.
Here they are today.
Yeah, Lazarus taxons exist all over the place. It's where they don't appear in the fossil record for millions of years and then they appear again. What happened? They disappeared for hundreds of millions of years and there they are again. Lazarus taxons. Look them up.
Yeah, but Matt, coelacanth and whales, they must have not lived together in the past at the same time because we don't find them together in the fossil record.
Yeah, because their fossil record isn't a perfect picture of time. When they learn that, the better they'll be.
But yet we see them today. Coelacanth swimming around, whales swimming around. Did they live together? Yep. They live together today.
They live together today, yeah.
So who cares if we don't find humans and, let's say, pterodactyls or humans and some therapsids together? Doesn't mean anything. The fossil record is so incomplete. 99% of it is marine fossils anyways. So anyways, that just goes to show that Sydney Raptor and the other evolutionists in the community, they simply haven't engaged our challenges. Were you going to present something, brother? I see something on your screen.
Yeah, actually, it goes to something that somebody said. I stored it over here and shared. Boom, that one. Okay. This is a question that came up. How do you refute Carmen et al. 2015 saying that we date the Y chromosome most recent common ancestor in Africa 254,000 years ago? Very easy. The actual study is this one right here. And it got 3 mutations per generation, but they hid it. That's right. They took the data and they hid it from the public in the very study itself. You see, what they did is it was the very first time that they ever scanned with high sequencing data to determine how many mutations were not seen before and look at all the mutations that actually came up. And if you go to the study, they hid it in the supplemental data. Look, they actually, if you go to the supplemental data, they actually said the number of the FS differences was approximately 10-fold higher than expected number of de novo mutation rates in the Y chromosome. And this finding prompted us to explore additional filters. That's right. The mutation rate was exactly the same as the other pedigree mutation rates, finding a 10-fold higher mutation rate. And they just, whoop, oh, well, just throw that in the trash.
because who needs to know that, right? Because when we go to the other study, they found the exact same thing, a fast mutation rate, which points to a Y chromosome of about 4,500 years ago range. Oh, why? Because of the known indels that were counted, and Nathaniel Jensen counted them up because guess what? The study still leaves the raw data there for you to find, but they know the public is never going to look. So it's just more shady evolutionary nonsense, hiding the data and not representing it because it doesn't match what they want you to believe. Who's real science?
Who exactly? Who believes in real science? We're the ones making the testable and falsifiable predictions. Matt, examining their rescue devices makes me even more confident as a biblical creationist. For example, last week, I responded to the Kentucky Atheist on C14 and diamonds. They're still repeating the same talking points that have been demolished over and over and over again. They're still saying, oh, this is just creationists making this stuff up, or we can't find what they're saying in the journals. It's like, how hard are they looking? They're not even looking. In my presentation, Matt, I'm going to pull it up here. In my C14 presentation, I went over from the radiocarbon journals, brother, the C14 that's found, high levels of C14. Notice this. From the secular radiocarbon literature, guys, their rebuttals are becoming boring because they're not actually engaging. It's the same thing with the Y chromosome issue. But notice this. These samples, given their position in the geological rock record, ought to be entirely C14 free, right? C14 is created in the upper atmosphere through cosmic ray bombardment, turning nitrogen into C14. We take it in because we eat the animals, we eat the plants, the animals eat the plants, the C14 comes into the plants. Okay, so we constantly have a little bit of C14 and it's decaying back into nitrogen. But the half-life is so short, it's about 5,700 years, that there should be no C14 at all in anything older than, let's say, 1 million years. And that's stretching it. But yet we find detectable levels of C14 in what? Marble, shell, coal, wood. And notice this, Matt. C14 value for 40,900 year corresponds to 1,270 times the AMS detection limit. This is for 10 coal samples. It correlates perfectly with the flood model, where they're all very similar, right? All this coal produced during the flood. Here's the C14 measured in diamonds. Results are between 40 times, and what does this say, Matt? 310 times the AMS detection limit. This C14 should not be there. It's not due to contamination of environment or even the lab. And it's not just trace amounts. And the point is, listening to these guys attempt to rebut these points, brother, shows me even more how powerful the evidence is for young earth creation. And it makes me even more confident as a young earth creationist because these rescue devices are so weak. They're not even trying anymore. They're just repeating talking points from people who are repeating talking points from somebody who was debunked 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's so bad for them. It's so bad for them. It's just kind of ridiculous at the point. You get to hear like the rescue point, and we're ready for it already because we've heard it 20 times and we even have slides ready to go. Kind of funny, really.
Right. And I wanted to pull this one up from Sydney Raptors. We start to wind it down. We said an hour. It looks like we're going to end it at an hour and a half. So we'll wind now. This was, as we said, this is a teaser, right? Because we could literally go for another 10 hours easily. Sydney says estimates of the world's population at the time of Noah's flood vary, but can range from 750 million. No, as I pointed out, God creates two people, Adam and Eve. They flourish. The Bible says, at this time, roughly, shortly after creation, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. But eventually the world descends into what? violence, wickedness, crime. There'd be a lot of murder. There'd be a lot of violence. People would not be following God's command to be fruitful and multiply. And so it doesn't make any sense that the population would be that large. But again, even going with 10 million, which I think is still is inflated. But even going with that, you divide that number by 700 million cubic kilometers of sediment. We only have a single human for every 70 cubic kilometers of rock. Again, that's needles in a haystack. And even if, Matt, if we found a pre-flood human, my question to you is, do you think we'd be able to recognize that it's a pre-flood human fossil? Because the human phenotype today, we're not saying is exactly the same as it was in the flood.
Right. Yeah, much more robust. Every feature of humans was better in the past.
Yeah.
Kind of a genetic mess.
Yeah. So, brother, we should debunk this one. We're giving Sydney, look at this assertion. What terrible logic. Step into the debate dojo, Sydney, because that's an assertion. It's perfect logic. It's based on numbers, based on what the Bible says. It's based on logic. Sydney, this whole time, like the usual atheist logic, right, Matt, mentality, hasn't answered any challenges. It's been refuted on mitochondrial DNA and hasn't engaged the discriminatory points that demolishes fish to fisherman evolution. I'll address one last point of Sydney. We know Sydney's not going to change his mind, but this is for the viewer. We like to leave no stone unturned. And so, Matt, we can respond to this as we move into our final points. So why did your own rake team come up with consistent 70,900 years for the coal diamond results? That's the point. That coal was formed all during the flood, and the dates you get in coal that shouldn't even have any C14. You see again how they don't actually address dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. There shouldn't even be any C14 in it. But yeah,
they don't even notice it. They don't even see it. It's just going right over their head. They're still like, whoa, how come it dates so old? What?
Exactly. It's like, dude, you're missing the whole point.
They're on step one still. They don't even, we're like on step 5. They're so far behind. It's crazy.
Exactly. So now it's like, okay, how do we as young earth creationists explain that according to our model? Well, it's easy. Okay. We can't assume that the C14, C12 has been constant since the creation of the earth, right, Matt? Before the flood, the ratio would have been different. There's good theoretical reasons for that. The C14, as we said earlier, is produced by cosmic rays striking nitrogen atoms. And so that would tend to what? Build up over time. So at creation, there may not have been any C14 in the atmosphere, but then it would start to build up over time. And therefore the C14 in the atmosphere would be increasing over time, which is why we get these inflated ages. But the point is, we're getting C14 where it shouldn't be if the earth really is billions of years old. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, brother?
No, just another person talking about radiometric dating. He goes, it's always evolving around carbon dating. What about potassium-argon dating? It's we can get into that, I guess. We know when we get into potassium-argon dating, what we're talking about is lava. See, what happened is lava forms rocks, and when they form those rocks, they trap the argon. And so now, how would you refute that? It's actually quite simple. It's already been done. So let me just drag myself down to my old notes, and we'll look down over at the radiometric dates for carbon, or potassium-argon. It's easy. These things have me and you have addressed them a lot, but I guess
also we should refer people to the program we did a few months ago where we demolished Gutzit Gibbon on the heat problem and dating methods, because we went for almost 4 hours, I think.
Right.
Everything dating methods.
Yeah, that was a good one. Let me remove that thing. Okay. So here's what happens. Lava comes out of a volcano and flows down. And as it solidifies and becomes rock, we have to now look at the data. We have to look at now the studies, like what's going on here. So submarine pillow basalt, this is looking at seafloor spreading, by the way.
We know that the data for the amount of excess radiogenic argon-40 is in direct function of both hydrostatic pressure, meaning as it goes down, it's pressurized. And then like when you swim in a pool and you hear your ears popping, more pressure, and the rate of cooling. So the colder it gets and the more pressure, the more it throws off the dates. It adds massive amounts of time. From lava flows that were 33 years old, they dated 22 million years. So we know something that happened 33 years ago, yet it dated 22 million. So they admit, like, we can't trust the dates of the seafloor threading at all. And they even say, don't trust it. Be careful when you're looking at these things. Don't just assume that they're correct. They say you can even see directly from here. It causes them to appear very old, even though they're not. This is from the peer-reviewed literature. This isn't some creationist stuff right here. Here, I've got more notes over here. Here we go. Look at this. Just read some of these statements that are made by the very people that discovered these things, and you'll notice a very constant theme. The dates are always wrong. They make them up most of the time. If they don't match the story, they throw them out. You can't trust it. It's very, very simple. So we can talk about, that was potassium-argon dating. We covered carbon dating. And if you want, like you said, they can go to the other ones and look at the radiometric dating of thorium down to lead. Go for it. We've covered everything. So
Matt, it makes sense that they get these wrong dates. And the exception doesn't overturn the rule, guys, because they'll point to like one or two areas that I think Pompeii's one where they say, oh, but we got an accurate date.
Right. Yeah. Of course, because they're using something like argon, where what happens is when something's on land, argon and argon dating, it can be pretty good because there's a diffusion rate. But remember, we're talking about things that are of known ages. And just like these mutation rates will land, they'll show you the accurate dates. Certain things will be accurate going backwards in time. And then all of a sudden, myth happens. Because what will happen is they're trying to combine things to match their dating, their time theme. So if something doesn't match the theme in the scenario, it gets rejected. So there are some things that can be used pretty good. For instance, dendrochronology, where you test the tree rings. Those are pretty accurate. And then all of a sudden, sometimes there will be a dry spell and a ring won't form. So there's inaccuracies even in our best, most accurate dating methods. So there's going to be some leeway. That's why you can see, like, okay, well, leave a little bit of wiggle room for some of these things. Thermal luminescence dating has a 50% inaccuracy dating. It's like, that's like a coin toss. Imagine you go somewhere and you're like, I want to do it. You might as well just throw a coin in the air. That's the accuracy.
Hey, remember the first time we ever heard that thermal luminescence dating?
Yeah, Katz, the guy you debated.
Yeah, crazy. Conspiracy Cats. Good guy. I like Conspiracy Cats. Actually, he and I have been chatting. I got to email him back. We're supposed to do some stuff in 2025. He's an evolutionist who I do enjoy discussing these topics with. But yeah, I debated him like 4 years ago now, I think, twice. And in the second debate, he brought that up, thermal luminescence dating. And that's why debating and engaging the critics is good. It's profitable. It's edifying. Because for those that just exist in nothing but an echo chamber, they're not actually going to see what the other side has to say. They're not going to see what their best arguments are. And so we've had a lot of training over the years, Matt. That's why the audience can be confident when we say we've seen either most or all of their rescue devices, because we've been engaging them nearly nonstop for about 5 years straight, just debating them over and over again, seeing what they have to offer. And so, Matt, what's funny in debates, what I'll get from deep time proponents, brother, I'll point out the discrepancies. Oh, they're getting dates of millions of years in rock samples that were just formed, right?
Right.
So we shouldn't be getting millions of years, but yet we do, even though they were just formed. And they'll say, oh, don't you know, you silly creationist, you're supposed to wait 100,000 years before you can actually date those rocks.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't work before then. Yeah.
So isn't that circular reasoning? So what if the earth is not 100,000 years?
It'll never work.
But we have to wait 100,000 years apparently to get an accurate date.
Yeah. See, circular.
See the logic?
Right.
So we can never really verify then. Let's take these rocks. We know when they were formed. Let's see if the method works. Let's see what date we get. Oh, 1 million years, 2 million years. And then there was, oh, you can't do that. You got to wait 100,000 years.
Right.
You can check. Well, then now we don't know. If something's
Exactly.
100,000 years old, we didn't see it form.
Right. That's the problem. Once you get to like the potassium and all these other dating methods are very old. But that's why if we look at the argon versus argon, or the helium and helium, these are more slippery elements. They can leave. So they test things that are younger, and they work. They work pretty good. Well, on land they work. That's why we can get them accurate dates with these things. But then they throw in a potassium with argon, and now they've just messed everything up because they've added something that we know when it forms in a laboratory dates old, even though it was just formed. So at the Proton 21 laboratories, when potassium is formed, it's formed in the same ratio and proportions that it's in on Earth. And the radioactivity that it gives off with a parent to daughter isotope shows that it's billions of years old when they formed 3 days ago. So we know that they are not accurate at all. Very simple.
Matt, look at this. These guys give us headaches. This is the best we have to offer. This is why it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. Sydney Raptor. You keep saying rescue devices. Yes, because that's what it is. C14, where it's not supposed to be found. Oh, well, maybe it's contaminated. We already looked at it, demolished it, but yet they keep repeating it. It's a rescue device. Okay. Notice this. But that is just more projection than the IMAX theater. A person accusing me of projecting as they're projecting. Why can you only poke holes in science? Why can you not provide any positive evidence? What have we just done for the last hour and a half? We went over all the evidence for our position. I started off this show, Matt, for the first 15 minutes going over what? The scriptural evidence for God creating two people, Adam and Eve. Special, unique, and independent from any other form of life. Then what did we do, Matt?
Went straight
to the scientific evidence.
Yeah.
We looked for positive evidence to support that.
Right.
The evidence didn't have to support that, Sydney, but yet it does. It meets biblical expectations. That's exactly what we did, but they don't listen, do they, Matt?
Or they don't care to listen. Like we even went to the peer-reviewed published journals of the secular literature. We didn't even talk about creationist stuff for them, for their own benefit, because we know once they hear, oh, it's an AIG journal, their mind shuts off and they're like, oh my God, it's retard stuff. So we just stick to the things that they'll listen to, and it's still not good enough for them. They'll say, right, oh, that's been refuted, but it's their own literature. So it's proof they're not listening. It's proof they don't care. Because we're getting it from the secular journals.
I love that. Yeah, I like when our favorite evolutionists like Sydney Raptor, I like when they're in the chat. I like when they make these kinds of comments, because it actually shows the audience, those that are objective, those that are honest thinkers. It shows them that, wow, Matt and Donny are right. The evolutionary community, they really do dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. The 5 Ds of evolutionary dodgeball. I'm telling you, man.
We answer all their questions. They give us more. We answer those. We show them directly from the studies. I mean, I don't know what else they could possibly want. We don't dodge anything. We answer every question.
Exactly. I mean, how many other programs or how many other ministries or channels out there do a whole video on the heat problem for almost 4 hours? How many people spend the amount of time that we do on basically every single one of their points, giving them answers? Listen, you can take a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink, right, brother?
Exactly. They say, well, you guys aren't doing real science. We're showing you the difference between real science and evolutionary science. That's the thing, is you guys think evolution is science. It's pseudoscience. It doesn't belong anywhere in science because, one, they don't make any good testable predictions, which is the gold standard of science. They failed down the line with every major prediction they've ever made. It's laughable. If you even 5% of what we do, you would be laughing that you ever even believed in evolution to begin with. Then we can even take it a step further and say, okay, well, if we're not even looking at testable predictions, what would we expect to be true if we just looked at the Bible and then looked at the science and science in general and then said, okay, what would we expect to see? You're going to find out next week exactly what that evidence is with our presentation. And it is undeniable that the biblical story is true.
Amen. That program, me, you, and Matt Powell, we are leaving no stone unturned, as we usually do. I mean, we did a whole series last year on creation science, and we just keep adding to our presentations, updating our presentations, and it is going to be very bad next week, right, Matt, for the evolutionists?
Oh, it's horrible. It's going to be bad. Yeah. I mean, I covered one subject today, and what's coming next week is 50.
I know. Bro, I'm looking at
get through it.
I've been so tempted to get into helium and zircon crystals and comets, and I'm like, no, we said sneak preview, so we're gonna wait till next week. So we'll end it with this.
What's great about my little presentation today is that's not even a sneak peek. That was going to happen. That has nothing to do with what's going to happen next week. So it's good. I didn't even tap into it.
But that was great. What you presented was perfect. Because so even in a sneak peek, you're providing irrefutable evidence.
Yeah, exactly. Something we didn't even plan on.
Right. And we saw what their assertions and their evolutionary philosophy is with our evolutionary friends in the chat. And there you go, audience. They got nothing. You need to be confident as a biblical creationist. And if you're a theistic evolutionist or an old earth creationist, why? The evidence for biblical creation and young earth creation in 2024 going into 2025 is incredible. The science refutes atheism. It refutes evolution. You don't have to reinterpret the scriptures. You don't have to adopt this theistic evolutionism. It's not necessary.
No, it's so dead. It's ridiculous. And most of the people that believe in evolution don't even know anything about it. Like they literally go, oh, the best evidence for evolution is genetic similarity. Oh, you mean the very thing that you guys said wasn't true in the beginning in the 1960s? Oh, that's right. That was a falsification based on those predictions. That's right. And just literally go down the list and their mind is blown. They literally don't know any of it. It's because we were never taught it. And then they get so defensive. They really want to be related to strawberries, you know?
Right. They're desperate.
Desperate.
They so desperately want to be related to strawberries, Matt, mosquitoes, walking sticks, banana plants, grass. They think that's science, brother.
Yeah, it's odd. It's odd. It's okay, though. We know why. We know why.
So, I wanted to demolish. This is the last thing I'll say for tonight. Then I'll give it to you to say whatever you want to say last, and then we're going to wrap it up. This has been fun. Time flies by when you're having fun on biblical creation. And so there's a few ancient Near Eastern scholars and apologists. They're theistic evolution largely, but they now want to say that Genesis 1:1 is translated incorrectly. And I want to demolish this, okay? Because they want to try and argue, well, this isn't the absolute beginning, and the universe could actually be billions of years old. And so what people have done, Matt, is they've attacked Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Isn't that amazing? Time, matter, and space. Science tells us time, matter, and space had to have come into existence at the same time, right? If you don't have time, when would you put matter in space? If you don't have space,
time for a reason.
What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Space time for a reason.
Exactly. And if you don't have space, where are you going to put matter? What are you going to put it in? Without matter, what are you going to put in space and time? So you need them all at the same time, coming together at once. And we have that right here. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Why the heaven? Because God then separates or splits up the heaven into the heavens, because you get the sky where the birds are, space where the sun, moon, and stars are. And then you have the third heaven where God is, where Paul, for example, was caught up to. Okay. So anyways, these guys now they want to attack Genesis 1 by saying, well, since the word in Hebrew, the definite article, the word the, they'll say the definite article is not there. And so this doesn't have to be the absolute beginning. It could be translated as in a beginning or when God began to create, right? Because they'll say that, well, this is when God took pre-existing material, this chaos, when the universe is in chaos, and then he began to create order out of that pre-existing material. But this is so easily debunked. It's nonsense. I mean, it's nonsensical to translate in a beginning. No, the question is, do we need the definite article for the absolute beginning in Hebrew? No. The beginning is a unique event. There's only ever been one beginning. Okay, so in beginning, yeah, there's no definite article in the Hebrew, and that makes sense. That's how the Hebrew works. There's only been one beginning of time. Therefore, it doesn't need a definite article. For example, Matt, take the earth, right? We could either say the earth or just earth because there's only one earth. We don't have to say in reference to God. We don't have to say the God. We could, but we don't have to. There's only one God. And that's why in the Bible, usually in Hebrew, sometimes there's a definite article on God, but usually we don't. It's just God. There's one God. And in terms of the beginning of time, the beginning of the creation of time, matter, and space, there's only one. It's a unique event. There's not going to be another one, and there only ever was one. And so if something's unique and special in its attributes, such as the creation week or the beginning, it doesn't need a definite article. Just like there's a couple days, day 1, day 2, day 3, up to the 6 days of creation, 7th day rested, where it doesn't have the definite article. Again, that's the same thing. So these guys that look to that as some kind of evidence against young earth creation, there's only been one day 1 of creation. It's not equivalent to, well, Monday is day 1 of the week. Tuesday is day 2. Then there's going to be another Monday, another Tuesday, another Monday, no. Day 1 of creation, day 2 of creation, so on and so forth. These are unique in their attributes. There's only ever been one day 1 of creation. There's only ever been one day 2. So it doesn't even need the definite article. That's why you can have a mix of definite articles and not definite articles. Okay. And so, yeah, the Hebrew basically says in beginning, but that's because it's a unique thing. There's only ever been one beginning. And so asserting, oh, well, there's no definite article here. And so that means we can translate it as in a beginning or when God began to create. That actually proves, Matt, that these people don't understand that in other languages, the definite article is used differently than it is in English. Imposing your logic of the English language on other languages, such as the Hebrew, is erroneous for so many reasons. A couple of the reasons that we just went over here. And so, yeah, I just wanted to put that one to bed because I've seen some theistic evolutionists now using that one, brother.
Yeah, no, it's popular. It's real popular right now.
It is, because there's some people that recognize that, yeah, the 7 days of creation, specifically the 6, we have morning and evening, are 24-hour days. Okay, so they're not impressed or convinced by your old earth interpretations that show, well, this is long periods of time or eras. So they'll say, well, this is cosmic temple language. And so sure, 24-hour days, but it's just symbolic of God taking that chaos or that pre-existing material and creating order of it, bringing it together and creating order of it. So what it could mean is when God began to create, or in a beginning. But again, that doesn't work. No, the beginning, there's only ever been one. It doesn't need the definite article. And their arguments on that basically that prove they don't understand the Hebrew language. So Matt, let's hand it to you. If there's anything you wanted to add to that, go ahead. Or if you had just a final topic you wanted to break down for us, or we can wrap it up. It's up to you, brother.
No, we've gone way over when we were supposed to, so we're all good.
As usual, eh?
Yeah. We'll just rest up and come back in a week with our new presentation ready to go.
Amen. Hey, Matt, great job tonight. Excellent presentation. Love it.
Thanks. Yeah, it was good. It was fun. We're
I'm
really interactive. I mean, the whole thing was evolved around the audience.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, in 2025, we can do more of those when we're both free and interact with our audience to present a bit and then take some objections, take some questions.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, brother. God bless you. God bless the audience. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all soon. Standing for Truth is out.